The challenge in Somalia is like I can't go to Somalia and say that I'm gonna feel safe and I can feel
Mm,
secure so that I can actually go and discover my roots. It's
yeah.
just like this deeply sorrowing feeling of like I can't. I remember 9/11 happened when I was 8 years old. Everyone knew my family was Muslim. I had like kids in third grade calling me terrorist. I just knew that I had to be very secure in who I was and really appreciate my identities and embrace them in order to be the leader that I wanted to be. When I'm around other Somali young people, I remind them that like a Somali American can accomplish something like being a professor at Stanford, right? The way I view success now is, am I helping more people than I'm helping myself? As a professor in the classroom and then the research that I'm doing, I view that as a success that I am teaching students to go and be leaders in civil and environmental engineering.
Welcome to Pinnacle Code, where we empower second and 1.5 generation Black Americans. I'm your host, Ben Arthur. Excited to be joined this week by Dr. Khalid Osman. He is Somali American, falls in the category of 1.5 generation as he was born outside the US but moved here when he was a kid. He is the assistant professor of civil and environmental engineering at Stanford University, a school you may have heard of, and also runs Osman Lab, which focuses on developing equitable infrastructure solutions for the most vulnerable communities. We went to the University of Portland together several years ago, and just a good dude with a very fascinating story. So, hope you guys enjoy. And without any further ado, let's go. So, my understanding, your family fled Somalia, ended up in Kenya as refugees, and that's where you were born, coastal city of Mombasa,
Correct.
in Kenya, which is where you were born, and your family received asylum, ended up in the U.S. at some point. But I'm curious, Khalid, what, if anything, do you remember about those first few years, very early years of your life, or what have you maybe been told about kind of those first few years?
Yeah, it's kind of separated into two phases. There's
Mhm.
the early years of being in America, while wearing, where you're from constantly on your chest and on your sleeve and constantly being reminded of that. Mostly in a way to say, like, don't forget where you come from. My
Mm.
parents beat that into me, um, and not beat in terms of the physical sense, but, made
Yeah,
sure to
got you.
remind me. Just want to clarify for our
Yeah,
listeners.
for sure.
Grandparents made sure that, I was definitely grounded in my roots, and that was really, I think, in my first several years of being in America was the language. And, I was taught Somali at a young age. It's my first language.
Mhm.
English is actually my second language. I didn't learn English until I went to school. And I think
Mm.
that's something that I hold dear to me right now, is to be able to engage and converse with my parents and grandparents in their native tongue. I think I'm very proud of to be able to say that I can't do that. The other piece is sort of trying to wipe away the bad, right? We weren't leaving Somalia because it was a pleasant place to be. We were kind of leaving because we had to.
Yeah.
And starting there, the story that, my father always tells me, and what was sort of the final draw of having to leave, was he had my twin sisters who are older than me in 1991, and he went out to go get some milk from them sometime in 92, and just being out and fetching some milk and getting hit by a stray bullet was sort of the wake up call for him. He's like, I blacked out,
Mm.
and all I could remember when I woke up is, we got to get out of here. And I think that incident sort of sped our process up just a little bit. My grandfather at the time was here in the States, and he got us on a quick plane, a makeshift plane. It wasn't an airline or anything like that. He just got us on a quick plane, landed us in Kenya in refugee camp,
Mhm.
and we kind of had to start our lives over multiple times, right? We leave Somalia where we had somewhat of a pleasant life, and we get to Kenya and we've got to start all over. We're in refugee camps, and you never know how long you're going to be there when you get to a refugee camp. It's not like they tell you, countries are taking people on a monthly basis or a yearly basis. You kind of get there and you have to create a home because you just don't know how long you're going to be there. And so my parents were there for a while. They had me there. They had my younger sister, and we were there for 4 years. And I was born 2 years into that stint, so I came to the States when I was two.
Okay.
Um, but I think it's the beauty of my parents always to making the most of any situation that they're in. They'll tell you that refugee camp, we had our family there. Most of our family was there. My father at the time, he was able to open up a store, just selling, little goods here and there. To It's more of a communal thing, not really to make money, but mostly to survive, and then just have the community really know who we are, and provide for that community. Given that my grandpa was in the States, and could send us some resources to be able to share with the community. And then 4 years in, 2 years after I was born, our status changed to be able to move here to the States, and we got
Mhm.
here, landed right in the heart of LA, and having to start our lives all over again. My father at the time wanted to go to college when he got here, but it just wasn't a reality. At that time, I think he already had 6 kids, and
Oh, damn.
we're living in LA, which is extremely expensive, and even with all the government help, it just wasn't enough. So we're in this 2 bedroom, 1 bathroom apartment, 6 kids, 2 parents, 8 people, and he felt that going to school would be a selfish thing, even if it meant sort of more long term social and economic mobility. It just wasn't satisfying the short term needs of the family. And so
Mhm.
he quickly stopped doing school, and started working at 7-Eleven. Um, but those were some scary days too, right? Working in at 7-Eleven in LA, he's like, I'm getting robbed at gunpoint, on a monthly basis. And
Mm.
it just felt no different to him than being in Somalia. Um, and
Mhm.
we was in LA for about 5 years. He went from 7-Eleven to, I think he was working like medical delivery. From medical delivery, I think he started doing taxi driving, and then from taxi driving, he started working at like a local rental car. Just trying to find different avenues of both safety and security, a consistent paycheck, and being able to provide for all of us. This whole time, my mom is just staying at home with us, making sure that we're all growing up the way that we're supposed to be growing up. And in that time, they actually had 2 more kids, and so now, we get to, I think it's late 1999, we got 8 kids, 2 parents, two-bedroom house, 1 bathroom. Getting up for school in the morning meant that if you didn't hit your 10-minute window to hit the bathroom, you weren't brushing
You
your
ain't
teeth
getting
that
in.
morning.
Yeah, yeah.
So, I just remember a lot of the early fights with my siblings was, "I'm in the bathroom right now. No, I'm in the bathroom right now." Some good times as kids. I think one brought us really close together, but then also at the time just didn't realize how bad that was. Because it just felt like we had food, we had shelter, we had water, and we had love. And so we
Yeah.
never thought of it as like, we're in poverty. Like, we're straight up definition of poverty. Um, but my dad at the time in 2000, he said, "All right, this is enough." We couldn't afford to live there anymore. So he did this sort of West Coast trip and stopped at a few cities in California, Oregon, and Washington. Just kind of did a road trip across the West Coast. And at the time, Portland was very affordable. And we got to move there in 2000. And that's where we kind of put down some roots. I don't know if I've veered too far off your original question. Kind of just giving
Oh,
you the story.
no, that context is really important, and I appreciate you kind of laying that out. Um, to kind of go off of what you were saying, though, I mean, even though as you kind of explained, like you felt loved and comfortable, even though you can look at it being grown now and realizing, oh, we really didn't have that much in the material sense, right? But
Right, right.
I'm curious, like, how much do you think that um maybe that lack in physical things, if you were conscious of that at all, how do you think all that maybe shaped the person you are today? Do you think maybe as you can look at it from a kind of a grown person's lens?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I can give you like a good example. We never celebrated my birthday,
Mm,
my entire life, and it wasn't until I got to high school that I finally celebrated my birthday. It just wasn't a thing in our family. It was, you're a year older. Here's, we'll make a prayer for you. I mean, that's a lot of what my mom gave me was always just prayers,
mm,
in Arabic they call it dua, but in English I think it'd be prayer. And that's we never really got material things. It was mostly, just given blessings and constant prayer. And I think for me, I never felt like I was missing something until I started to enter these spaces like college, being at a university like University of Portland, where for me, spring break meant that like I could work a couple extra hours to make a little bit of extra money so I can have, some shoes and some, put gas in my car, pay my insurance, and then help my parents when I could. But then everyone else is like going on spring break to vacation in X, Y, and Z place, or people go on summer break cruises. And I just never had a chance to share those stories with
Mm,
my peers. And it was in those moments that I started to realize that like things were different for me. But I think growing up, like even when I was in high school, I feel like everyone around me kind of was in a similar situation. Even if the story wasn't the same, the context was pretty familiar.
mm,
And so it was very easy to kind of get along and make friends and sort of bask in our, I guess, similarities.
mhm,
And it wasn't until I entered like these other spaces like college and grad school and even now where I work that I start to realize that there's this huge gap that others have had an opportunity to have an experience in terms of physical material and even like experiences as far as traveling and going to places that I just never had. um, but I do see myself now trying to catch up, right, and
mm.
give myself those experiences now in adulthood that I didn't have in my youth and my younger selves. But I'm also making a very clear emphasis to give those things to my children, and very focused on making sure that they have what they need, and to an extent, right. Um, I also don't want them to be just very spoiled and privileged, but
Yeah.
making sure that they know that they can rely on me for the things that they need. But mostly giving them the experiences that they have sort of a worldview and world lens. Um, I feel like my world lens and worldview often came from the stories of my parents and my grandparents, not necessarily going and living those things myself.
Going off of what you were saying about just kind of the life you want to be able to maybe give your kids that you didn't maybe have yourself. I guess how do you kind of approach that, right? Because you don't want them to be spoiled, but you also want them to maybe have in a way that you didn't. So I guess while both your kids are both under 2 years old at this time, how are you thinking about providing um, in a way that again that you didn't have, but also making sure that they kind of have the things that you did have in your home, right? Like love and um, kind of security in other ways. Like how do you in your mind kind of think about going about that balance?
Yeah, and I think it starts with the latter versus the former. We've been very my wife and I, Erica, have been very sort of specific about making sure that the kids feel loved first, making sure that how we treat them in the house in terms of their emotional security, their mental security has been extremely important and something we've been prioritizing. They're both not at an age now where they're sort of asking us for material things, but I'm sure it'll happen at some point, especially living in the environment that we live in here in Palo Alto. All the kids are enormously wealthy, beyond measure.
Mm.
And it is something that I constantly think about. We haven't had to tackle it just yet, but it is something that we're constantly thinking about is how do we ensure that they're not comparing themselves to their peers and that they understand that what they have at home is more than enough, more than what we had, um, while also ensuring that they stay humble through it all. And I think for us, it's bringing them around grandparents, bringing them around uncles and aunties, and just having that whole sort of collective community remind them of where they came from and those humble beginnings. I'm hoping, right? You never know what twist and turn is going to happen throughout the development, both psychologically, physically, mentally for children. Um, but I'm hoping by providing them with that sort of buffer of family, love, support, that they see the value in those things more so than the material.
Earlier, Khalid, you talked about kind of that dichotomy of kind of growing up, right? Like you grew up around maybe a lower socioeconomic environment, but then once you started going to like UP and other stuff like that, around being in higher ed environments, maybe more middle class, upper middle class people, and you maybe had more of a sense of a relatability with those lower socioeconomic kids because even though maybe your context was different in terms of what your family went through. There was maybe a shared sense of struggle, maybe in the material sense, right? Um, but kind of within that, right? Growing up in your youth, um, maybe being around, really curious because just being around other Black Americans, right? I guess how conscious were you of, or how actively were you thinking about your differences with others who looked like you, just in your environment? Because right, yeah, obviously family came from East Africa, kind of first generation of your family kind of growing up here, and then you're around Black Americans, generations of their family have been here, and you guys may look the same, right? And maybe have similar struggles, but then also you're very different, right? And so how did you maybe look at your identity in that sense? And is that something you even what we're thinking about coming up?
Yeah, I mean, I think that also sort of developed as I grew up. When we landed in LA when I was 2, up until I was 7, we lived in an all black neighborhood. Actually, it was a black Muslim neighborhood,
Okay.
and I think at the time what tied us all together was just that religion piece. You know, we often didn't even think about, yeah, and obviously, like, I spoke a different language and my family had different food and cultural values, but I think being in that neighborhood, going to school with those kids, it made me feel like I was a Black American at the time, more so
Mhm.
than, like, I'm a Somali American. I think my parents really wanted to root it in me that, you know, you're Somali American, and I think that's how they always see us. Um, but I think I took the perspective of how does the world see me? You know, how does the rest of the United States see me? And it's as a Black American, and I think I sort of stuck to that identity.
Mm.
And as the years went on, I think that identity grew for me stronger than my Somali American identity just because of everyone that I was around. I was never in a largely Somali community growing up.
Mhm.
I didn't go to like largely Somali schools. I didn't go to I feel like the one place that I would often see other Somali people was at the mosque. Um, but I was spending most of my time in, you know, my basketball teams, my weekends, my friends, my close groups. It was often sort of this uh, mostly American collective of people,
Yeah.
and so I think that's where I kind of grew my identity more so than being Somali American. But at the same time, it's like I never left that. Like I said, I think two places where I still hold on to that very strongly is in the language. I can speak the language quite well. Um, and I am proud of that. And then the other piece is just being able to engage with my parents and the broader community. I haven't left the community. I don't say that I'm not Somali. I've never told anyone that I'm not Somali. I haven't had that crisis. I still do believe it's a deep rooted part of my identity. But I think in terms of like coming here as a 2 year old, very new to a place, and being surrounded by people who are not Somali in themselves kind of made me realize that, you know, the world's going to see me one way. I've got to
Yeah.
kind of adapt to that one way that the world sees me.
I'm wondering though, have you ever, and I know you speak the language, right? But have you ever thought of leaning more into the Somali side? Because I've noticed just in my experience being Ghanaian, I kind of had a similar experience as you, just in that, you know, the Black people I'm around, they're Black American. And so I identify as that. And that's how America sees me, right? They don't think
Right, right,
about the complexities of what Black identity can be. But I think as I've gotten older, like I'm really starting to think like I don't want me to like be the last of like this Ghanaian kind of heritage, right? Just living in
right,
America, right?
right,
Because
right.
it could very easily just kind of wash away, and then it's like my kids have no kind of connection to the roots, right? And so I'm wondering, like for you, have you thought about that at all?
Yeah.
Like how that'll work, making sure you maybe preserve that Somali side of you, even though you again you speak the language. But have you thought about that?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's something across my mind all the time. I do think about it a lot, especially now with having two kids and trying to think about how do I raise them to understand their Somali heritage and to be proud of their Somali roots. And I think that takes me being proud of my Somali heritage, proud of my roots, and I am. Uh, but figuring out ways to sort of emulate that has been challenging in the environments that I'm in. I mean, I'm not ever and haven't ever been in sort of environments where I have large collectives of Somali folks around me, and I think that's one place where trying to bring them around the family as much as possible,
Hmm.
and me being around family as much as possible has been helpful. My son now, he'll throw in a few words here and there, which has been nice, and him talking to his grandparents has sort of ensured him that he has that identity. And my wife does a good job too of just reminding them of that identity. But myself, like, I think the difference and maybe the challenge, obviously, I don't want to compare myself to you, but like, I would love to go to Ghana. My brother was just there.
Mm,
You can go there, you can feel safe, you can feel secure. I think the challenge in Somalia is like I can't go to Somalia and say that I'm going to feel safe and I can feel
mm,
secure,
yeah.
that I wouldn't feel threatened for my security, so that I can actually go and discover my roots and go to the places my parents went, and look at where they met, and where they and we still have land there. We have a ton of land there, that we still own to this day, but I just have never felt like it was a safe place for me to go. And I
Mm,
think it is getting better, but I still think there's a long ways to go. Um, my brother actually, yeah, he just spent like 4 or 6 weeks in Ghana as part of his university study abroad.
okay.
And
Very
I'm
cool.
like I'm like, I would love to do something like that in Somalia. And it's
Yeah.
just like this deeply sorrowing feeling of like I can't. And
Mm,
it's similar, like as a civil engineer, I'm doing work in, I have students from Uganda who want to do work in Uganda. I've got students from Nigeria wanting to do work in Nigeria around energy equity and water equity. We've got students in South Africa and Kenya who want to do work on water quality, water access, water efficiency, and affordability. And I'm like, Somalia needs all these things. I would love to be the part of the diaspora that does something. And I know there's a large collective of us across the US. I'm part of the Somali National Professionals Association, I think it's
okay.
Snappy, um, which is a United States-wide diaspora of professionals who are all Somali, who wanna do good for the country, but we often just run into these hurdles of, there's just not safety and security, and
Mm,
when you don't have those foundations, it's really hard to do anything and make progress, and then you've got corruption, but I mean, corruption's across the world. I don't wanna use corruption as a scapegoat. I think if there was some safety and security, there would definitely feel like a lot more opportunity for me to go back and do good for where I came from. Just hasn't happened yet, but I'm optimistic.
for sure. And I want to go back a second because you said there's like a deep sorrow in being unable to like really go to Somalia and kind of experience that. Like what when you say deep sorrow, is there like a part of you? Like I don't want this to be like a therapy session, but like
Sure, sure, sure.
is there like a I don't know, something that in you that feels almost missing? Or like when you say deep sorrow, like what do you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is something that's missing. One thing I didn't mention in my background story, we don't really have photos from our childhood. I don't have photos from my parents' weddings. My grandparents don't have photos. A lot of those things got swept away in a flood, in
Mm,
Somalia, and so really the only way to relive that and to really see it is with your own eyes, and I just don't have the opportunity to do that in this current moment, and I think that's the part of me that's like,
mm,
I love stories, and my parents have told me stories my whole life. There's no illustrations to those stories, there's no visualization of those stories. The only way to get those illustrations would be to go there and experience it,
mm,
but it's just not I think the safest place to be right now, and to go and experience those things. And I think the sorrow just comes from, how old am I now? Like 32 years of my parents telling me about this amazing place, right? But then when you turn on the TV or you turn on the news or you talk to family members, it's often not positive things. It's
mm,
often negative things
yeah.
happening there. And so I think that's where the sorrow comes from.
Mm. Yeah, I think honestly, I think even though you mentioned Ghana as a place where you mentioned your brother, but I think people across the diaspora, Ghana, and that's really cool being Ghanaian, that Ghana has been a place that people can go to connect back with the continent, whether their parents are from there or they're Black American and generate their slavery, whatever, and this is their first time touching African soil. That Ghana is kind of their first connection back. But I don't know, you just talking about kind of just the corruption and kind of the coverage of Somalia, like I still see very negative, and this is probably across the continent, but just like the perception um, of what Africa is, and I
Yeah.
think people are
Yeah.
still kind of grappling um, with that, and even just within just the diverse black community here in the U.S. I think there have been, you know, I think over time it's gotten better, but there is still like a massive misconception among Black Americans of what Africa is. And so
Yeah.
when you said kind of the media that I don't know, it just kind of made me think of that. I don't know where I was going with that, but I just felt like I needed to
Yeah.
say that.
Yeah, and I don't know if this will make it into the final cut of the podcast, but I just remember being on like basketball teams, and obviously, like you could tell my features, my physique, my family, who come to the games. It's obvious that I'm not, 100% Black American, African American,
Yeah,
in the sense that I do have immigration status that we immigrated to this country from Africa. So there's always the joke of like African booty scratcher, right? And
yeah,
those types of things to create separation between who I am and who my teammates may have been, or who I am and who Americans who have generations and historical presence here in this country. And so I would always hear those types of things, and I kind of just brushed them off because at the end of the day, I always felt like if you and I walked into a store side by side, we would be perceived the same. No one's gonna sit there and say like, "Oh, you're Ghanaian, you're
yeah,
Somali, and the
yeah,
person next to you is from Georgia," right? It's you're all black, and
for
that's
sure. Yeah,
and I think that's how I kind of viewed it. But there was those sort of jabs and little jokes here and there that I came up with through all of uh, I don't hear it now, and I actually didn't hear it much in college, but
yeah,
all of elementary school, middle school, high school, regardless of the same struggles socioeconomically that I may have been going through peers with, there was still this sort of like differentiating factor that they
exactly.
made clear. And I kind of just brushed it off. I never really paid much attention to it.
For sure.
Some of that followed just my religion too. I mean,
Hmm.
I remember 9/11 happened when I was 8 years old. And obviously everyone knew my family was Muslim. It wasn't no surprise. So I had like kids in third grade calling me terrorist, right? And that persisted from elementary school, middle school, as Islamophobia took over in the United States. It was obvious that there was always like you and then us, right?
Yeah.
And there was these jokes around terrorism and screaming Allahu Akbar, when they see me in the hallways, or just stuff like that that I always just kind of brushed off. I didn't pay much attention to. Um,
You brushed it off, but did that hurt you? I'm sure it hurt you, or like how did you kind of deal with all that?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I was younger, like I didn't know how to make sense of it. I kind of was just like, what is going on? And as I got into like middle high school and I'm going through like my adolescence phase, and it was weird because part of you kind of feels like, do you leave your religion behind and just kind of assimilate fully? Because obviously your religion is not viewed as something beautiful, even if it's beautiful to you, it's viewed in the eyes of everyone else. It's like this bad thing. But then I think, like, by the time and that was, like, maybe middle school, and I think by the time I got to high school, I was just so secure in my identity that, people make jokes, and it just didn't hurt me anymore. I kinda was just like, "Ah, whatever." Like, sometimes I'd also I think I got to a point where, like, I felt like at least I have something, that's sort of my mentality got to, was like, at least I have a religion,
Yeah.
and that sounds bad, but to me, I felt like that was relieving,
Mm.
um, to be able to say, like, I have something, like, I can always fall back on something that on my worst days, I can fall back on my religion, and I have this community that comes with that religion. And I feel like everybody didn't have that, and so I felt blessed in that position to be able to have that.
What was it about being in high school that allowed you to just kind of brush that off? Was it just what you said, maybe just kind of getting older, more mature, and just understanding your roots, or was there a particular moment where you got to that point of like just F it, like it's just who I am, and this is, I'm not gonna let this bother me anymore.
I think it's a combination of both, and then just like, I don't know, there's something weird happened to me between that transition where I became so focused on leadership. Like,
Mm,
my transition, I don't know if it's I went to summer camp or just everything that was happening, or if it was just like a natural process that, when I hit like 14, 15 years old, I just wanted to be a leader. and everything in my blood just always pushed me towards leadership. And so I think to be a leader, and at the time I was like heavy on reading about Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali and some of those iconic figures in civil rights era here in the United States. It kind of just pushed me towards leadership and wanting to
Mm.
really be secure in who I am in order to be the leader that I know that I can be. And I don't know, it clicked for me really early. I don't know how to describe it. And so like all through our high school, I was student body president at my high school too.
Okay.
Um, and
Natural born leader.
yeah, and then
Yeah.
on my basketball teams, I was always team captain. I mean, I think it was just those things that
Mm.
for me, I just knew that I had to be very secure in who I was and really appreciate my identities and embrace them in order to be the leader that I wanted to be. And so I really just started to go after leadership as soon as I got to high school. And I think that's part of where that transition and just kind of feeling secure in my identity came from. And then I also have 6 younger siblings, and I think maybe that's where like the natural born leader comes from is
Mm.
like I want them to be comfortable in their own skin. And so I have to be able to emulate what I want for them and myself. And so setting that example for me was so critical, so important. Um, and I think that's why uh, I always like every action that I did, I always felt like I had to set an example for them. Uh, and I think that's where that sort of leadership mindset came from. But there was also like, I want to say from high school to college was like another leap in terms of like the type of leader that I wanted to be because
Mm.
it clicked to me when I graduated high school and I got to like these, predominantly white institutions that anything that I did is a reflection of all Black people.
Mm. Yeah.
And I always felt that. Like, I feel that to this day, as a professor um, at an institution. And even when I was in grad school, I felt this way, which is that like, I always have to be on my best behavior because the moment that I'm not is going to be seen as a reflection of all people, of all identities I come from, right? The news article is going to say either a Black man, it's going to say a Somali man, or it's going to say a Muslim man.
Yeah.
And I just don't ever want that to happen.
Yeah.
And so I think I carry that. It's a lot to carry, though. I agree with you in that, in terms of weight and putting that burden on yourself. It's a lot.
Yeah, it's definitely not fair, but it's reality living in America, right? Like
Yeah, yeah.
it's the hand we're dealt. And I wanted to go back a second because just as you're growing into a leader, growing into yourself, becoming more just comfortable with who you are, I guess, how does your sense of identity, how do you begin grappling with it, right? Because you're Somali, you're East African more broadly, you're Black American because you grew up here, you're Muslim, you're Black Muslim, uh all of this concoction of different things, right, is who Dr. Khalid Osman is. So how do you look at maybe that blended sense of identity now?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question. I I think now more so than ever, I try to embrace and highlight every one of those identities because it feels like we're in a time today that each of those identities in its own self is sort of attacked or
Mm.
looked down upon across the spectrum. And so depending on what environment I'm in, right? When I'm around other Somali young people, I remind them that like a Somali American can accomplish something like being a professor at Stanford, right? Can go through an engineering program, can go through grad school and can become a professor teaching other students, knowledge and passing on knowledge and doing this amazing research that I'm doing in terms of giving back to my community. Whenever I'm in an audience of students who are of lower socioeconomic class or students who are particularly Black American, like I can relate to your story. Like I grew up in the same neighborhoods. It might be not, 100% the same, but I can relate somewhat. And in that relation, like I can tell you and try to motivate you to show you that you can become something, even when the odds are against you and the world's against you and your back is against the wall. Use those moments as sort of opportunities to give back. And then same thing in my Muslim communities. Like, hey, obviously the world context in which it is today, we're not viewed favorably. We haven't been for the last 50 or 100 years. Um, but how we combat that is continue to just show the amazing things that we're doing for the world, and part of that. So I wouldn't say it's so much like now I'm in a place where I feel like I have to hide anything, which is amazing. Like just being able to, I think there's a sense of liberation that happened once you sort of get to a point in your career, or maybe it's a point in your life that you feel liberated from any attack against these identities, and you start to just embrace each and every one of them. And I do think that like me as Khalid, I take them all in at once, but depending on my environment, each one of those comes out a little bit differently.
Mhm.
Is how I would think about it. I think to summarize, it's like code switching, right?
Exactly. Yeah,
Depending on
yeah,
where
yeah.
you are,
Yeah, yeah,
you
yeah.
definitely have to do that.
Khalid, given your family's journey from Somalia to Kenya to the US, given your upbringing, lower socioeconomic environment, kind of borderline poverty, whatever you want to call it or package it, um, all that you've experienced, what is maybe your perspective on what success and achievement means?
Yeah, that's a great question. And for me, I've always viewed success as sort of what I had growing up, which is, both parents at home, feeling love, not really thinking about material gain, but knowing that, I always have this sort of safety and security in my home. Um, I think to me that like in the long term, a sense of what life is, like that's what we're all fighting for, right? Is sort of success feels to me like being able to really feel loved and appreciated and wanted and doing good. But now, as I was going through school, obviously those things aren't what I was targeting.
Yeah.
um, in a more practical sense, the way I view success now is, you know, and this is my personal view and always been a universal view is, am I helping more people than I'm helping myself? And I think as a professor in the classroom and then the research that I'm doing, I view that as a success that I am teaching students to go and be leaders in civil and environmental engineering. Every year, 100 students pass through my class. That's 100 leaders that I'm putting out into the world, and I view that as success. In my research, I'm working directly on the ground with communities on water access issues, water affordability issues, any policies that I can put in place, any new interventions that I can put in place so that those communities, view their water in a favorable way. I view that as success. And so I think for me, it's always been, how many more people than myself am I helping? And if I can't count the number on the both of my hands, then I've reached success. And I still view that to be the same today. I've never really looked at like dollar figures or having a house and car. But obviously, those are things that come with being able to live out your dreams and passions. You kind of end up with those things eventually. Um, but I always put the sort of putting giving back to society as my first step in measuring what success means to me. But the cool
What
thing about like going through this process is you get to define what success means, right?
Mhm.
And I think that's something I try to tell young people. But sorry, I interrupted your question.
Oh, no, you're fine. What I was just gonna say is what is it about civil and environmental engineering that maybe spoke to your spirit so much? Because I know, well, based on what I read, I guess your family, your parents wanted you to be a doctor, which is like the most African thing ever, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
but what was it about engineering specifically, the segment of engineering that you're in, to where you felt like, okay, this is me. This is how I could have the most impact in my own unique way on the world.
Yeah, I'll take you back to like elementary school. And man, I don't know if you remember the parent teacher conferences. There's always like a language barrier, and the teachers were mean, man. You know, I don't think they understood that there was that language barrier. And so they would tell my dad stuff like, your son, his handwriting sucks, right? Obviously, they wouldn't use those words. And we would come home and like my dad would not play about school. School was the one thing. I give you a story, and it's funny to think about now, but I could see why he was so adamant. One day we didn't decide to skip school. We missed the bus. It was like me and my younger siblings, and actually my older siblings. It's like six of us or something. We all just like missed the bus one morning, and we stayed home, and my dad, he would work from morning to evening, and he'd do like 12-hour shifts. And he gets home, and we're all watching TV. It was like after dinner, it was 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock or something. He gets home, TV's on, and we're all watching TV. And then he like comes through the door and he says, "Your mom said," and context, we're poor, right? A TV is very expensive in 2001, 2002.
Yeah.
Uh, he comes over, he's like, "Your mom said none of you went to school today." I was like, "Yeah, we weren't feeling well," and, like, we're all trying to come up with some excuse. He just takes the TV and, like, smashes it on the floor, and he goes just literally throws it on the floor, busts the TV,
Dog, that's crazy.
and is like, "Try to miss school again." And I was like, "So we didn't even have a TV for a while because trying to replace that thing, being poor, it was crazy." Uh,
Dog.
so that's the context for, like, how serious my dad took school. And so, like, these teachers in these conferences, man, they didn't get that context, and so they would be like, "Yo, your son's handwriting is bad, your son's writing is bad." I'm like, "I'm trying to learn English, like, English is my second language, it's not my first. You guys are being hard." So, English being my second language, I was always drawn to, like, math. Math, I didn't need to have good handwriting, I didn't have to tell stories, I didn't have to try to convey my thoughts in a coherent manner, I could just do the numbers, and I was really good at it. And I got to a point where I was doing, like, competitive math, like, I was very competitive, I wanted to be first in my class when it came to math. That was all still, like, back of my mind. I wanted to be a doctor, I had to be a doctor. And then I think around 6th grade, we took, like, life sciences class, and we watched, like, a woman giving birth, and I was like, "Oh, hell no." I was like, "Nope." And I think in, like, 7th and 8th grade too, they would talk to us about needles, and, they show us blood, and, like, we were dissecting pig eyeballs and stuff. And, like, as all these things are happening, like, I'm either passing out or I'm throwing up. And I think it made me realize right then and there, like, this medical thing's just not for me. And at the time, I was like, I really love math. I really enjoy my science classes. Not so much my writing and reading classes, although I learned to appreciate those a little bit more the older that I got. But at the time, it was mostly math and science. And so naturally, people started introducing engineering to me, like the after school programs I was in and stuff. And I was like, "Ah, I don't want to build cars. I don't want to build, phones and computers." Like that didn't really strike me as something that I wanted to do. I really wanted to be a doctor because I wanted to help people. And at some point in time, like I can't remember who it was. Somebody introduced me to civil engineering, which is, you know, I think the way they phrased it is like for a doctor to get to work, they have to take a road. For them to help patients, they have to have clean water. They have to have a building to be able to work in. And there's a large part of the world that doesn't have access to these basic infrastructures. Um, and so for me, I was like, oh, wow, like I never thought about it that way. Like helping people through infrastructure allows me to both satisfy both of my passions, which is one, making sure I'm giving back and dedicating my life to giving back, and then two, utilizing these strengths that I have in math and science. And so, putting those two things together, I applied for a lot of colleges trying to do civil engineering, and my mom just wasn't ready to let me leave home. And so I ended up at University of Portland, and it ended up for the best. I really loved the program there. When I started, um, one of the professors really made sure that I was involved in internships and really seeing what I was learning, right, and practicing what I was learning, and it just made me fall deeper in love with the field. At the time, I was working on the Orange Line Max in Oregon and
Okay.
helping to design that, or
Oh,
working with the team as an intern to design that. And it was just really cool for me to be able to see what I was, building and designing out in the world, and then seeing people use it. And I was like, oh wow,
wow.
like this is very gratifying work. And so I stuck with it. When I graduated and went to grad school, I had no intention of doing a PhD. I had no intention of doing research. I mostly just wanted to sharpen a few skills. But when I got to my PhD program, the Flint water crisis happened, and a lot of what happened in Flint had to do with decision making while excluding communities, and not bringing communities into decision making processes that affect them directly as it relates to civil and engineering. And I started researching why that was. And, a lot of the engineers just don't know how to talk to people. We're not trained in sort of what you said, civic engagement. We're trained to make the best bridge and make sure that it stands, or that make sure that water is at the right pressure, being
Yeah.
processed and cleaned the
Mhm.
right way and being delivered to your tap. But how we make those decisions, we never thought that we needed to involve the public or other people in those processes. And so I started doing research on that. I was working with my professor there, Casey Faust, and she had some really cool data sets that we were working through. And I kind of fell in love with the research process. It gave me on the ground experience, forced me to seek out knowledge, and then to create knowledge, new knowledge, and then to capture people's experiences and relate those to engineers. So it's cool sort of trajectory for me. And yeah, kind of now I get to continue doing that work while also teaching young engineering leaders that there's more to engineering than just numbers, that we have to think about the context in which we're designing and building in.
So was you mentioned the whole Flint water crisis. Was that because, and I know just based on my research, like for Osman Lab, your a big focus is kind of water infrastructure. Was that kind of a catalyst for that? How did is that related, or how does what's the relationship between those two things, if anything?
Yeah, actually, when I graduated from UP and went to UT, I was doing construction engineering. So I was
Okay.
really passionate about building buildings. I built the OHSU South Waterfront Hospital and the cancer hospital down there. Daimler's building in Portland. I was working on that project, and so and then in Texas, Texas State, their brand new basketball stadium and locker rooms. Like I was hands on helping to
Wow.
build those things, so it was really fun.
Okay.
Um, but it was the Flint water crisis that sort of made me rethink, like, okay, cool, I'm building hospitals, and that's fun. It's helping patients get access to care, and then I'm building basketball stadiums, giving athletes access to facilities that are quite amazing. But I think there was this like deep fulfillment in my heart that I just wasn't getting yet in terms of like small scale community scale infrastructure, um, where the direct impact to people like you and me was visible and clear. And I think researching the Flint water crisis sort of, yeah, opened up that avenue for me. Like, wait, like water is a crisis in our country,
Yeah.
and it's a big crisis, and not one that we pay attention to until something goes wrong.
Mm.
Um, that's kind of the paradigm in all of civil engineering, which is, everyone takes for granted the bridges and the roads, but you get one pothole and it's like, who the hell,
Yeah.
what is going on? Or like a bridge collapses and all of a sudden people pay attention to civil engineers. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, the flood crisis, I think, was the sort of pathway for me to start thinking about water a little bit more closely and more critically, and how water is accessed, distributed, maintained in the US. So kind of dedicated my research program to that with a specific focus on disadvantaged communities.
Awesome. Well, Khalid, this has been great. I guess where can people go online or on social media to learn more about you, your I guess your work in academia at Stanford, civil engineering, or I guess Osman Lab.
Yeah, best place to go first is my website. Our website, the lab's website, is just osman.science. Feel free to head there, just learn more about us. My email is on there, my profile is on there. I'm also on LinkedIn. I'm really bad about responding to LinkedIn messages, but if you email me directly, almost always respond to emails directly. But I am on LinkedIn. It's just LinkedIn/Khalid K Osman. I'm on Twitter, although I don't check it as often, but also at Khalid K Osman.
Okay. Awesome. And for all you listening, that will be in the show notes. And last one for you, Khalid, this is kind of something I ask all my guests at the end. It's kind of a broad question, so bear with me a little
Sure.
bit. But um, what is one thing you believe people can do more of to get a step closer to reaching like their pinnacle, to maximize their personal potential, so to speak?
Ooh, ending with a hard one.
Yeah.
I think consistency. I think one thing that is really hard is to start something and to do it consistently. And it doesn't matter what that is, whether it's working out, right? For working out, it's first going to the gym once. If you can do something once, you could do it twice, it's okay. But if you can do it every single day and be consistent about doing it, I think that that is how you get a step closer to your dreams. And you talk to any athlete, you talk to any world leader, you talk to people who um, do motivational talk. I think they'll say that as well. And I think that's something I found in my own life, is that I'll be really good about something for a day, or I'll be really good about it for a week, and then life kind of jumps in and starts distracting you, and you get pulled in a million directions, and it's hard to be consistent. But once you can master being consistent in something, nothing can stop you, right? It's you've sort of trained yourself to be very, very consistent. So yeah, I would say as a parting thing is, it doesn't matter what you're passionate about. Um, Consistency is something that sort of encapsulates any field, any profession, any goal. Is as long as you can be consistent in that goal, and consistently show up and do what you're supposed to do in a consistent fashion, then you're going to do well. Uh, I think the worst you can be is do something really great one time and do something really bad another time, and not try to be consistently doing the same thing all the time. So,
Good stuff. Dr. Khalid Osman, thank you so much for your
yeah.
time, and for all you listening via YouTube, Apple Podcast, Spotify. Thank you guys for all the support, encouragement, the love. Please be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't already. Hit the bell so you know when new episodes are coming out. And then you can follow on Apple or Spotify. Give me a rating, comment. All that feedback helps me to improve the show and give you guys the best show possible. But you guys know the deal. Every other Wednesday, 5 p.m. Central Time. Until then, I'll see you guys soon. All right. Peace out.